We are back on the Rational Boomer podcast. Hopefully, your day is going well. It is Monday, and it's very close to the election. And we've been talking to a lot of folks on the show, a lot of regular guests on the show. And a semi regular guest has been Arlene Unfiltered from TikTok. And I thought it important to bring her here because she knows a lot of shit I don't when it comes to data and all that. I go with feelings and I go with impressions, but she has all the data. And I know people are sending you well, first of all, welcome, Arlene. Thank you for taking the
Yeah,
time.
thank
I
you
know
so
you're
much.
busy.
Appreciate it. Yeah, no problem at all. My pleasure always.
We were talking about it, how we got people coming out of the woodwork. Could you come here? Could you do this? I, I'm not that popular with my family, so I don't know what to do with that. But as when this airs, tomorrow will be election day. Today is Monday when they're hearing this. And what's your gut feeling now as somebody who's been paying close attention to the data? I watch these polls and fucking piss me off.
Well, I haven't paid attention to a single one of the polls, the national polls. I don't find them to be useful in any way because they're not representative of the population at large. And this second part of it is that um, they don't give us any insight into what's going to happen at the state level. What you'd have to do is look at a state poll to get some sense of what's happening in that state, because
Right.
what you're looking for is who's likely to win that state and collect those electoral votes. But when you're looking at national polls, it's not helpful because even if the polls were correct, that would only tell you what the popular vote is. It's not going to tell you what the popular vote is per state, and that determines the electoral vote allocation. So I have no use for the polls at the national level. There was one poll that came out the other night. It is an Iowa poll
Right.
that Donald Trump won Iowa by 10 percentage points in 2020, and he also won Iowa in 2016. But prior to that, Iowa had been blue for about I think four presidential elections and had kind of been reliably blue. And then here comes Donald Trump, and with a very low turnout in the 2016 election, Iowa goes to Trump. And then for some reason, he really got Iowa behind him in 2020. But interestingly enough, with this poll from Ann Selzer, she's a pollster, a highly respected pollster in Iowa, and she only does polling in Iowa. And what she's seeing in the polling data as of October is that Kamala Harris is at 47%, Donald Trump is at 44%. And it's what she has found in that data is that it's being driven by women, older women, and independent women, all leaning in the direction of Kamala Harris by big numbers or by big margins. And so, the big issue is reproductive freedom and reproductive rights. And if we can take anything away from this poll in Iowa, we can't extrapolate from that to the rest of the country. We
Right.
can't generalize to the country, but what we can say is that, a lot of women in a place like Iowa that's red, um, they're pissed. And they're pissed that Roe v. Wade was overturned. They're pissed about all of these abortion bans being enacted across the country. There was one enacted just very recently in Iowa, and these women have had enough. And it goes across the aisle in both red and blue. And so this may be a big blowback against these conservative Republicans, and they're going to find out that they're being punished at the voting booth. And so this could be what I would say is I don't have any evidence of this. I can't say with certainty, but I think that if you see this happening in a state like Iowa, I would not be surprised to see something similar happening in other comparable states.
Yeah, exactly. I think you and I both have said this. I know I've said this from the beginning. If you set everything else aside, the Roe v. Wade, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, that is the big issue. That may be the biggest issue in the history of presidential politics. They maybe with Nixon back with Watergate and all that stuff, maybe that had some things, but this is a huge issue because it affects more than 50% of this country. It takes constitutional rights. That's why when I hear the media talk about what's going on in Arizona, and or Iowa, and they say, well, the women are mad. Well, no shit. No shit, they're mad.
Mhm.
This is a war
Yeah,
against
exactly.
women. The idea that they would
It
fight
is.
back, that's not crazy to think.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what you can expect. And, you know, I mean, no one ever in a million years imagined that Roe v. Wade could be overturned because here's the thing, you don't create laws that are designed to limit people's rights. You create laws that expand people's rights. And yet they did the complete opposite and they did it. I mean, the level of misogyny that is present here in this election, Donald Trump's behavior, he just reeks of it. The people who follow him, his supporters, the people who are voting for him, what is at the root of this is misogyny, the absolute uh, unmitigated hatred of women. And it's just like, this is how it is all coming out. And there is going to be backlash and they're going to pay for it. You know, you've seen as Donald Trump has become more and more extreme, as these conservatives who are up for reelection have seen how much an issue reproductive freedom is for women in this country, and they're starting to walk back their pro-life views. I mean,
Yeah.
they're complete hypocrites because, they sway with the wind. They're just trying to figure out how they can benefit from, having one point of view versus another point of view. And they've been riding on Donald Trump's coattail for so long, and they feel like they can't act inconsistent with Donald Trump. Not that they would, because they have their own personal convictions, but they're going to pay for it. And clearly, what we have just seen in Iowa, in a place that is conservative, that has gone red in the last two elections, and if they elected Donald Trump by a full 10 percentage points in the last election, you would think that the trajectory for Donald Trump would be that even more people would be supporting him because this is his third time running. Um, and yet, that is not what's happening. And I think that is a harbinger of what is to come. I just don't know where.
Yeah. Well, when I watch the mainstream media news and we talk about data, and I know you don't look at the polls that much, I don't give them much credence either. But it gets so tiring how, well, there's a guy, Steve Kornacki on MSNBC. My wife
Mhm.
loves him. Everybody loves him. I'm sure he's a good guy. He's only dealing with what he has. But they break it down to such minutia in terms of data. Like, for example, he was talking about enthusiasm going into an election. And I don't even know how they gauge that. Do they just ask people, are you enthusiastic? That just seems weird. Anyway, he was trying to say that enthusiasm was higher in 2020 than it is right now. And that seems to be absolute
Among whom?
bullshit. Well,
Among
that
whom?
they don't tell you. Just among voters, there are more people are enthusiastic in 2020 than they are now, and that seems to me there's no way that can be true. Just no
I,
way.
I don't know what he's looking at and what he's using to gauge that and what it is relative to and what people he's talking about.
That's my
Like,
point. Yeah,
I think that we have to put this in the context of something that I read the other day. I think it was in the New York Times, where they were talking about how all of these pollsters, the national pollsters, have become so gun shy about their polling numbers that they're going overboard in the direction of supporting Donald Trump, because they are no longer able to trust their polling data, in part because it's primarily all men, and they're
yeah,
not factoring in women, figuring out what it is that they need to do to really gauge what is happening for women, and the feeling, because they're not thinking about how women are experiencing this election. And when you talk about there's more enthusiasm, and you just look at the campaign trail and you consider the difference in Donald Trump's campaign events relative to 2020, relative to 2016, he's fallen off a cliff. Here comes Kamala Harris. You look at every one of her campaign events, the big ones especially. the one at the Ellipse that had 75,000 people there. Every event that she's done in a big city, Detroit had 30, 40,000 people, in and outside that airplane hangar. All of the places that she's going, there are people, it's filled to the rafters, and they're just like beside themselves with excitement.
Yeah,
So
that's
whatever
what I'm
they're
saying.
talking about, I mean, if you were to say anything about level of engagement, I wouldn't talk about level enthusiasm. If you talk about level of engagement and level of intention, you would look at the number of people who have done early voting this far. So we've got, I think as of tonight, it's like 79, um, 79, I forget what it is, 79 million people have already early voted, and we're still waiting for another 32 million mail-in ballots to come in. And we had 101 million people vote during COVID with early voting. And if we get all of the mail-in ballots in, we've already exceeded that number at this point, and they haven't finished counting all of the mail-in ballots. And then I mean, people are creatures of habit. People who vote on voting day vote on voting day. You know
Right.
what? That's what they do. That's, people our age, they vote on voting day because that's what we've done our entire lives. It's kind of a ritual. And so, to have any expectation that there's going to be a lower level of voter participation on election day would be ridiculous because, in Pennsylvania, they don't even allow early in-person voting. And so you've got 1.7 million mail-in ballots from Pennsylvania. You had 7 million, almost 7 million ballots cast in 2020. That means you've got, probably 5.5 million people going to the polls. If the numbers are similar to 2020, you got 5.5 million people right there just in Pennsylvania. How many more people across the country are going on election day? So it's going to be a record turnout.
It's going to be a record turnout. The total votes in 2020 was like 155 million. So we're
Yeah,
certainly going to
58.
exceed that.
Yeah.
And that was a record, wasn't it, at that point?
Yeah, oh my God. Well, the election before, I think the Clinton-Trump election, I think they had 128 million people voted. We were
Right.
30 million people shy in 2016, which is part of why Hillary Clinton lost. We just didn't have the voter turnout, but the Dems turned out in numbers in 2020. And if you think that the Democrats are not coming out in numbers this time, we see it in Georgia, where in the early voting, they've identified 631,000 ballots that have been received from people who did not vote at all in 2020.
Yeah, that's amazing.
631,000 votes. So you take the 5 million votes that they cast in Georgia in 2020, probably similar to this time, tack on an extra 631,000 votes. I mean, that is a significant increase in the number of votes. And you got to
Absolutely.
wonder what direction those votes are going. And I would venture to say that the majority of them, majority is 51%, but I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if you didn't have at least 60% of those new votes going to Kamala Harris.
Regarding the polling, you mentioned this guy before, Nate Silver. He used to own 538. He had a lot of credibility because they were right a lot back in history. Then he sold it, and then he sold out to the Republicans, and he's been nothing more than a Trump-la-fuck hack anyway. But he said something yesterday that's interesting. It makes you understand about the polls. He said the odds that all the polls would be so similar is like billions to one, suggesting there's got to be something funny going on here, that it
Yeah.
can't be all accurate or it can't be all above board. The likelihood of all these polls being similar or that close is virtually impossible.
Yeah, it's kind of like, from that New York Times article where they're all gun shy, they're all running scared, and they're all moving in a direction. All they're doing is clustering around one another so that it's the whole pack of them that are wrong instead of the individuals that get cherry picked for being so wrong. They are now just a scared herd because, they don't get paid if they don't have decent polls. Because if they can't deliver to a campaign or to the public any sense that their polls are reliable, why would anyone hire them anymore?
That's a good
And
point.
historically, none of them are accurate anyways. And when you talk about, 1 to 3 percentage points. What they always do, this is the real rub about the polling companies. They come out there and you know what? They wouldn't even have to do any polling. They could just come out and say, oh, we did this poll, make up the numbers and whatever. And they'd say, oh, it's like 1% this direction, 1% that direction. Maybe it's 2%, maybe it's 3%. And then what happens is all the numbers come in, all the votes are collected, and then they'll say, it'll be like 5%, and they'll be like, oh, we were close because we were only 2 percentage points off, but
Right.
each percentage represents 1.5 million people. Because if you have 150 million people voting, 1 percentage point difference is 1.5 million people. So I mean, they're just all playing games with the polling. And again, like I said at the outset, the polls don't mean anything when it comes to what's happening about who's winning each individual state, because that's who's collecting the electoral votes. National
Right.
polls are meaningless.
Well, what I noticed with the polls, they're hot and heavy before the election. The election happens, they could be off, they probably are off, but people are so focused on the win of the election, these pollsters just kind of fade off into darkness. And then later they said, we did really well in 2024,
Yep,
whether
yep.
they did or not. It's just
They all
all a shell game.
That's right. Yeah, I went back and looked at the 264 polls from 2016, and Donald Trump won the election, and 234 of them had called for Hillary Clinton to win by various percentages. And then the
Yeah.
ones that were calling for Donald Trump to win, their number, the spreads were so wide. It was ridiculous. And they changed, they're doing the polling from roughly June, July, all the way until, election day. And each poll would be listed once again among the 264. And consistently, certain polling companies had the same kind of results every single time. And I was just like, you guys are just gaming the system here. You don't know shit about shit.
Yeah, no, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think there's a lot of that going on. And I just want to tell the folks listening, you have to understand, and she's doing a hell of a job here. She's doing this podcast, this recording of this podcast after doing a hour and a half live on TikTok. And I give you credit. I don't know that I could do that. But I've said for a while now that I think, and I'm curious as to your take on it and how you're feeling now about it. Like one of the previous times we talked, I think you were a little skeptical about what I was saying. I'm going to see if you have a changed attitude. I think
Mhm,
Kamala Harris wins. I don't think there's any question she wins. And I
mhm.
think she wins by a decisive amount. I'm not going to say landslide, but I think that's possible. The way things are going with women and everybody who's alienated, which is everybody.
Mhm.
How are you feeling about what's going to happen on November 5th?
Well, I think, how are you defining decisive? Are you talking about that in terms
I'm
of
not, because I want to be right no matter what. No, no, put it this way. I think decisive would be a bigger win than Biden had.
Mm, mhm. Yes, I think she's going to have a bigger win than Biden had. I don't care about the popular vote. I only care about what happens in each state.
Right.
What I'm seeing of the numbers coming out of North Carolina, where you've seen an influx of 440,000 new residents since the last election, with an increase in population in Georgia, plus you have 631,000 votes that you know of already that did not vote anywhere in 2020, meaning people came off the sidelines, and they are people who became eligible to vote um, since the last election, and people who have just simply never voted before.
Right.
There are people who sit on the sidelines who've been voting along the way and they just didn't vote in the last election, versus people who literally have never voted in their life before because their husband wouldn't allow them to. There are cases of that out there where these, 80-year-old women, their husbands have died and now they're voting for the very first time in their life. And so, I was not comfortable making any recommendation or suggestion that Georgia and North Carolina were going to go um, blue. But I think with the numbers that we're seeing, with the increase in population, a lot of that population ends up going into big employment areas, which are the
Right.
bigger cities, which skew Democrat. with these people, new voters and off the sidelines and first-time voters in the numbers that there are in Georgia. Um, I think it's entirely possible both of those states could go to Harris. I'm still confident that Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania go to her. The only question I feel I have more confidence now in Georgia and North Carolina because I have more data to work with. Whereas with Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, we just have to wait for the votes. But I
Right.
just don't see, I don't see there being a compelling enough reason for people to vote for Donald Trump, especially given the number of women who are coming out and how angry they are. I don't see how he takes one of the three blue wall states. Moving over to Arizona, I mean, Arizona is a tough state for a Democrat to get, and Biden only got Arizona by 10,000 votes. We're now looking at Iowa. That should probably be considered a swing state now. So now we've got eight of them, and then there's Nevada, which has historically gone blue. And, unless for some reason Donald Trump has made some kind of inroads there, he has the voting base, he has the voting blocks that he does. They're very clearly identified. And the question is, has he been able to activate more of those kinds of people? He's got like this approach where he's using, he's going after these low propensity voters, but my heavens, it's a big lift to try and get somebody who's not inclined to vote to actually go out and vote. And he has no ground game. Like yesterday or on Saturday, excuse me, in Pennsylvania, the Harris campaign knocked on 807,000 doors.
Right.
They made they had calls to they knocked on 215,000 doors in Wisconsin, 256,000 doors in Michigan, 940,000 calls to Wisconsin, and 721,000 calls to Michigan. That's just in one day. Donald Trump has done none of that. So where does he get the votes?
Well, that's exactly right. That's one thing you don't hear in the media. People ask me, why are you so sure Kamala Harris will win? I said, well, look at the fundraising. She's burying him in fundraising. When it comes to running a campaign, debatably, she's running the best presidential candidate, certainly in my
Flawless,
lifetime. He's
flawless.
running the worst campaign in history. Um, she has an exceptional ground game, as you pointed out. He has no ground game. Just on those factors right there, that should
Mhm.
tell you Kamala's going to win. I mean,
Yeah.
those things come into play in a presidential election, and she's blowing them away.
Yeah, and in the last days of the campaign, what you've got, I mean, there are people that are flying all over the country, going and canvassing, knocking on doors in other states, primarily the swing states. And the level of commitment to this ground game on the part of volunteers, where yesterday in Wisconsin, they had so many volunteers, they didn't have enough doors to knock on.
Yeah.
And so when you have a ground game like that, where you are essentially going after every single vote that might exist in a state, and your team is the only team doing that, it begs the question of how does a campaign win without that kind of effort if the opponent has that kind of effort? Like,
Uh,
where do the votes come from? I just don't see where the votes come from.
well, that's exactly right. And the other thing people have to consider too is I remember the good old days when Gary Hart had a bimbo sitting on his knee and he lost a race, or
What was
when,
it,
or
1984?
yeah, 1984, or even before that, when what was his name? He was George McGovern's vice presidential nominee, and it was exposed that he had a couple of appointments with a psychiatrist, so they replaced him
Oh, that's right.
with
Oh,
Sergeant
my
Shriver to a point where I've always said, let Donald Trump talk. He'll bury himself. He'll beat
God,
himself
he has.
easier or worse than Kamala could ever do. Um, but what's gone on in the last month or so? I mean, just some of the craziest shit from
Well, look
Liz
at Madison
Cheney.
Square Garden.
Though that all that has to come into play. And people who may like the guy and they hear him say this crazy shit, that's got to have some effect on votes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, he has become increasingly more incendiary, more inflammatory. Um, he's taken off the gloves and he's pulling no punches, including the recent thing involving, a not so veiled threat or call to arms
Right.
uh, to his followers with respect to Liz Cheney. He has no filter and he has no fear. And he stokes division among Americans, and he uses his foot soldiers to go out there and carry out his bidding. And he's never held responsible for it because he can never do anything wrong. But this behavior that he continues to engage in, um, I don't see where he gets additional votes. And he made a fatal, fatal error in what happened with Madison Square Gardens about the Puerto Ricans. I mean, he had done so much work to get the Latino vote in Florida, primarily in South Florida, that he beat Biden in the last election by in Florida by like 350,000 votes, maybe it was 330, 340, whatever. And that was because of the Latino vote. He had cultivated that population like nobody's business, and he won as a result of it.
Right.
But now you go and alienate the very people you had been cultivating. There,
It's
there's
amazing.
there is no explanation for it. There's no reason. It's certainly not a smart political strategy. But I think that as has the case has been made that Donald Trump is not in this campaign to win it. He is in it to litigate it.
I agree. I agree.
And that's what he's doing because he cannot lose. It is not possible. He doesn't even take the campaigning seriously. He's just there for the media exposure and for the praise and the adulation. But at the end of the day, he refuses to accept the possibility that he, Donald Trump, could ever lose at anything. And so he's not even running in this race. He's simply waiting for it to be over to unleash all of the lawyers.
You know, I've always said when Donald Trump does something horrific, we tend to forget other horrific things he's done. You
Yeah,
mentioned you mentioned the Puerto Ricans, right? Let's
yeah.
not forget about the Haitians.
Yeah, I mean, just rewind a little bit and we're back at the Haitians, and then rewind some more and we're, going after the childless cat ladies. This entire campaign has been one designed to alienate as many people as possible. That is not how you win an election, but he didn't intend to win the election. He intended to litigate it by claiming that it was not fair and that it was fraudulent because it is the only way he does anything in life is that it has to be someone else's fault that he did not succeed.
Now, some people are saying, like you're suggesting, that he's not even trying to win it, and
Mhm.
that may be. I think Donald Trump tends to be delusional. I know narcissist, and they think they can pull anything out of the fire. They can talk their way out of anything.
Yeah.
I have a different take on where he's at right now. He's
Okay.
feeling the pressure as a
Hmm.
narcissist, and narcissists are like a shithouse rat in a corner. They just do anything and everything that comes to them. And they're like a bully. A bully will come up and threaten you. And if that doesn't work, they'll threaten you worse. And then they'll
Yeah.
threaten you worse until you succumb.
Yeah.
And I think Donald Trump is in meltdown. I think he's flailing. I think he's panicking. And I think he's trying anything to save himself. And like you say, he doesn't have a filter. So he'll say fucking anything.
Yeah. I completely agree. And I think that where he went off the rails was the point at which Kamala Harris became the candidate because he had no strategy for dealing with someone like her. I mean, how do you run against somebody who's a career prosecutor when you're a convicted felon? And the fact that she's a woman and she's a Black South Asian woman, and the list just goes on and on and on of the extent to which he does not measure up to her. And he doesn't know how to deal with women in any other way than he does as a misogynistic bully.
All right.
And that has been on full display this entire campaign, with him further ramping it up, most recently in, what he has done with respect to Liz Cheney. These are all his enemies, and he's out for revenge. And, Kamala Harris is the biggest enemy because she's got bigger audiences. And she was on Saturday Night Live on Saturday. And, she's stealing
The
his,
fame.
yeah, she's stealing all of the, she's stealing media attention and
And she's getting the
awareness.
adulation that he's not getting.
That's right. But the only thing she's not getting is decent press coverage. She's still not getting decent press coverage. I mean, you look at the LA Times and the Washington Post, who refused to endorse a candidate, even though one of them had prepared a very lengthy segment, like not so much an expose, but an investigation into Donald Trump. They were prepared to publish the whole thing and then endorse her. And the billionaire owner of the LA Times said, no, we're not doing that. And then move over to the other coast, and here the Washington Post refuses. And Jeff Bezos has got, negotiations going on with Donald Trump about his Blue Origin
Right,
company and
right.
him competing with Elon Musk. And so the Washington Post is still publishing things that are detrimental uh, or unflattering to Kamala Harris. Like, they've doubled down. Jeff Bezos, owner of the Washington Post, has simply he has chosen his side, and it's disgraceful.
Well, what's
It's
most disgraceful to me
disgraceful.
is clearly they're complicit with Donald Trump, but
Of
they don't
course they
have
are.
but they don't have the courage to stand up and say it. So they're going to hedge their bets by saying, "Oh, we're not endorsing
They
anybody.
are.
We're not political," even though the fucking Washington Post is probably the most political paper in the country, or at least it has been up to this point. Here's the thing. I'm ho when this is all said and done, let's say Kamala Harris wins in a big way
Mhm.
after listening for 2 years, the media telling us, oh man, it's a toss up. It's a
Mhm.
toss up. I'm going to be
Yeah.
happy Kamala won, but I'm going to be very angry at the media because the media has proven that they aren't a reliable source to the people of this country.
Yeah. And the media is going to have to make a decision which side they're on, because when Kamala Harris wins, they're going to be in the press room. And I mean, the Washington Post lost hundreds of thousands of subscribers when they refused to endorse. Same thing with the LA Times. And your newspaper does not survive when you lose subscribers
Not in
on
this
that.
day and age. You're lucky you got
Oh,
one.
yeah, you're lucky you even have a publication. And the thing is that, you've alienated your readership. You've put a stake in the ground and made clear your position. You've completely lost all credibility when it comes to any kind of reporting about political matters and elections. All of the media have destroyed their reputations given the way that they have covered Kamala Harris in this campaign, and they are going to have to choose which side they're on as we go forward, because my expectation is fully that the media will continue attacking her for her entire
You think so?
time.
Really?
I absolutely do, because what else drives ratings?
Yeah, but I think one of the things that's going to be exposed in this election, if it happens the way I'm seeing it, everybody's saying, well, it's 50-50. If we go to this side, we get 50%. I think it's going to be pretty clear that 50% of the country doesn't support Donald Trump. I think it's going to be less than 50% that supports Donald Trump. So then do you
Yeah.
choose the base and a few more, or do you go with, I mean, I don't care if they support Kamala Harris. I just want the truth. And it's fucking impossible to get the truth on mainstream media or the full
Well,
truth.
yeah, for sure. And the other thing too is that all of the media have turned into talking heads. I
Yeah.
mean, how on earth did Andrea Mitchell turn into a talking head? She used to be a serious journalist. She was a Washington correspondent. She was a serious person. And then, like, the things that have come out of her mouth in recent years, I don't even understand who Andrea Mitchell is anymore, but I think it is, she's been hanging on for dear life to hang on to her position there, and she's probably one of the oldest journalists out there, but none of these people are journalists anymore. They certainly aren't investigative journalists, and
No.
none of them are talking about the news in the way that, you and I remember the news. Like, the news was the news. It was a recounting of the facts of a particular situation as they were known, with no editorializing. They left it to the consumer of this news to draw their own conclusions. But now it's like there's MSNBC, who isn't very good anymore at what they
No.
do.
No, they
And then
aren't.
you've got all the rest of them with all of their talking heads. There's like no legitimate news from anyone because it's not even so much just the people broadcasting the news, meaning delivering it. It is the people who are making editorial decisions about what news is being put on TV. And none of those people are serious journalists because all of this is about their ad revenue. It is all about making money, and
Right.
you don't make money when you support an administration. I think they're going to crucify her.
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah, that's certainly possible. You can't trust what the media is going to do. They're certainly not working in the best interest of the country. My wife got particularly mad about Andrea, um, Andrea Mitchell.
Yeah.
She had the audacity to talk about Joe Biden when he was needing to step aside. And this old bitch is way past her expiration date. She's having trouble keeping sentences straight too. And
Yeah.
and I've had some people locally in radio that have been on since they're like 100, and I go, you guys got to get off, man. You're past
Yeah.
your prime, and she's past her prime. She was good. She was reputable at one point. But isn't that interesting? When you see all the people in the media, whether it be Jake Tapper, Dana Bash, Andrea Mitchell, any of the people we're seeing, there's only a few out there that have shown some integrity. I think Lawrence O'Donnell has, but other than
Mhm.
that, I think there's one guy that makes me angry more. He doesn't make me angry, but what happened to him? There's a guy named Mehdi Hassan. Now
Yeah, no.
this guy knows how to do an interview and tear people apart. And if he had been talking to Donald Trump in 2015, Donald Trump would have never been president. Mehdi Hassan
Mhm.
goes on MSNBC. They see they like him on the show, so they give him a weekend show, and then they fire him. The one
Yeah.
guy that can do the fucking job, and they fire him. And I'm sure he's pissed
Yeah.
off about that. But that just goes to show they're not about digging out the news. They're not about pushing the issues. They're about, as you say, making money. And that's
That,
troubling for people who count on them for their only information.
well, and the other thing too is that I mean, the extent to which we're degrading or the public's ability to analyze anything is being degraded as a result of the way the information is being passed on to them is deeply problematic. There are so many people who, I mean, through whatever education system they came through, don't know even their most basic civics, or they don't remember it. They don't
Right.
remember what they learned in American government, the most fundamental things that we need to be talking about to keep our democracy strong. People just don't know, and they're relying on alternate forms of knowledge or information, and they're using content creators that have no background and no history and no education in the things that they're talking about. They're just regurgitating the
Right.
stuff that they're consuming. And so I see this devolution of um, critical thinking on the part of the
No
consumer
question.
of all this information. And it's leaving us in a place where, the media has dumbed down the American people to such extent that no one even knows how to actually find any information that's correct.
Well, the thing about it is me doing TikTok. I won't say you because you're educated and you know your shit. But for me, as an old white guy sitting in my living room talking about the things and
Yeah.
having the followers I have and such, the only thing I can credit that to is still having some ability with critical thinking.
Yeah, totally.
I'm not the brightest guy in the world. I don't know everything. I read up on stuff, I study stuff, I analyze stuff, and I tell you what I think based on what I see. But I'm not a genius and I'm not an expert. But hopefully I employ enough critical thinking to parse this out as opposed to being lazy and just saying what's going to sell clicks. And the people who are getting it just go, no, that sounds good, or that sounds like what I want to hear. So I'm going with that. And that's the problem. There isn't enough critical thinking out here.
Yeah, and there's no analysis being done of the kind of content that people are consuming. And, there is a real concern about the fact that these MAGAs in various states are dismantling their departments of education
Right.
and destroying the curriculums. They're suppressing uh, history that the reality is right now in certain places, there are children who are not learning about the most basic things in our American history.
Definitely.
And the reality today is that the only people who can tell them that history are people our age and older because we are the carriers of this history. And there is a certain amount of history, most notably the civil rights movement, that all of us lived, and the Vietnam War, and the fact that we actually do remember the Holocaust
Yeah.
because we learned about that, all the things that we learned about. So it's almost like we're just about the last generation of people who are still carrying the history as it was being taught at a time where these people weren't tampering with our education system.
Right. Yeah. I think there's something to be said about that. I talk to people, young people, older people, and we talk about just basic subjects. And I'm appalled sometimes about how little these people know about basic historical facts. I mean, stuff that everybody should know. And
Yeah,
somebody will say, well, that happened in the 70s. I don't know that. Well, I was growing up in the 70s and I knew what happened in the 40s because it made a difference. And I
yeah,
think you're right.
exactly.
There is some degradation
Mhm,
of critical thinking and just passing on historical information. Everybody's too busy, running cat videos.
mhm,
Here's the good news and the bad news. I think we're going to continue to see an exile from mainstream media, the streaming outlets, the news. They're losing
yeah,
viewers and listeners every day, and they're coming to the
mhm,
internet. And if they run into somebody like you or me or somebody like us, cool. But there's a lot of people out here, like you say,
mhm,
that aren't worth fucking anything to listen to. There's as many bad people on the internet as there are on mainstream media. So again, it comes down to who do you choose to look at? And I've said this all along. People want to say, well, the Democrats are divisive, the Republicans are divisive. I really think the media is what's caused us to be divisive because everybody watches what they
mhm.
want and everybody tells a different story. So I can talk to a
Yeah,
Trumplefuck and say, what about this? And he goes, I never heard of that.
yeah,
How do you bring
yeah.
people together if we don't know the whole story? All of us.
Yeah, I mean, you even see this happening right now where the Gen Z young women have this thing going on TikTok. It's been trending where this generation never heard that audio tape of Donald Trump
Right.
talking about, grabbing the or
Yeah.
PUSSY.
Right.
Um, these young women never heard any of that. They part of it is they don't actually understand why he's such a bad guy. I
Of
mean, they
course, they
know
were
just
10
generally
at the
looking
time
at
when
him,
it came
but
out. They were 10 at the
or
time.
younger.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now there's this viral trend where they show themselves on the camera listening to the video and it's their facial reactions. And this is just going like wildfire across these Gen Z young women. And that is a good thing because at least you're getting the information out there.
Well, and
Um,
that's when this should have all stopped.
but I still Well, yeah, no kidding. Well, you know what? It should have stopped with that, but it should have stopped at the point that in Donald Trump's campaign where he made fun of that guy who was disabled.
Yeah.
That should have been enough. Like how that did not make people in that audience uncomfortable enough to say this is not okay, um, and then walk out in response to it. They themselves are complicit in all of this happening. They participated in that. They facilitated it. They encouraged it. And so they're on the hook for this. They're the ones who created this division because I don't know in the history of Democrats as we know them today, I don't know anything that Democrats have ever done that would fall in the realm of divisiveness. Democrats don't go around trying to be divisive. They're trying to drag everybody and their issues under the same tent, which is
Right.
why historically we've never been able to get anything done. So
Right.
we're trying to do everything for everyone, but at least the motivation is to do something for everyone. Whereas for them, they are not interested in doing anything for anyone other than themselves.
I've often blamed the left side media for Donald Trump becoming president too. And this is why. when he came down those golden escalator or wherever he came down from, he was no more a legitimate candidate than, and I'm gonna give our age here. He was no more a legitimate candidate than Pat Paulson in '68 or Joe Walsh in '76. You
Oh,
know, they were jokes.
oh
It
my
was just a
God, no
joke.
kidding.
And he was a
No,
joke. And the reason why I blame the left side media, because he became such a shit show, he became such an attraction that they put him on every fucking day. It was all free. He was on every day. And as he spent more time on left side media, he became
yeah.
more credible. So I blame left side media for Donald Trump ever becoming president.
Yeah, because no one took him seriously. How could you? Even people that were in the that are in the MAGA movement didn't take him seriously. They just didn't want Hillary Clinton, so they voted for Donald Trump. Nobody was like falling all over themselves to vote for Donald Trump. Certainly he had his contingent of people who were interested in him because he was like the anti-establishment party or candidate running against the epitome of an establishment candidate in the form of Hillary Clinton. And so, like here's Donald Trump. He should have been like he shouldn't have even been a consideration, but that's who she was running against. And when he first ran, he was not so menacing. He
No,
was just being, his
stupid.
New York developer bluster and all that nonsense of, how all of what all the glitz and wealth of Trump Tower and all that kind of crap. But, that's all he was. And people thought because he was allegedly, now discounted, a successful businessman, they thought that he would be in a better position to run the government than like a politician. And so he
Whoops.
started out yeah, exactly. He started out in one way. He did not come across as all that threatening. Everybody knew he used to be a Democrat. So, like, how could he have been, considered to be potentially harmful in any way? He was a showman. That's what he was at the time. And he put on a show. He was a good carnival barker,
Yeah.
and he managed to get himself elected. And, aside from all of the things that he did during his term, that were enriching himself and his family, he didn't go so far. Um, he wasn't so extreme. I mean, he did a lot of bad things when he was in office, but he wasn't so extreme overtly that would make people turn away from him. And
No.
then the longer he was in office, and then he becomes a private citizen, and then this whole joke of suggesting that the election was stolen and going down there, that was the beginning of the end with him, and everyone should have seen that. I mean, for any American to suggest that our election wasn't free and fair after having participated in elections for the history of elections in America, it's ridiculous.
Well, what people don't understand in 2016, they probably don't remember this. MAGA, as we know it now, wasn't a thing. It
That's right.
wasn't. It wasn't as egregious. It wasn't crazy. That didn't take place till after he was elected. And then became very
That's right.
tribal. You're going after
Mhm.
our guy because he's a stupid fuck, and we're going after you because you're going after our guy. And then that it just
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of bubbled under over those 4 years. And then after he lost in 2020, it just exploded, and now it was a
yeah.
full-on war. Uh, and Donald Trump. Let me ask you this: you say when he was coming in, he didn't seem to have this evil side to him, and I agree. I don't think he came in.
It was there. It was absolutely there. It's always been there with him. It's
Yeah,
just that it wasn't visible.
but for me, it's what causes that to happen. It's not necessarily that he's smart enough to come up with these evil plans like overturning Roe v. Wade or anything. I think what happened when he came in here, the Republicans didn't want him because he was a dope. But once he got in there, they said, this motherfucker is easy to manipulate. So we got all these evil people
That's
like the
exactly,
Mitch McConnells, and they said, you got to do this to get
yeah.
votes. You got to do this to get money. So I think what he did was originated from the people around him that understood they could manipulate him, and they did. And then he became this evil guy. I don't
Yeah,
think that was his intention initially, but he will do anything he can to benefit himself, however egregious.
absolutely. Yeah. I don't think that I, I I don't think that he ever intended to become president. No matter, he was interested
I
in
agree.
the process because it was going to bring him great attention. It would sell more of his books. It would create new opportunities for him. It would put him in contact with really powerful people in different places. And, forgive the expression, but Donald Trump is a star fucker. He
Yeah.
likes really wealthy men that are like
Or
authoritarian. I mean,
dictators. Yeah.
he likes men, dictators. He likes men who are like his father.
Right.
And he is, forgive the expression, but he's their bitch.
Yeah. Exactly. And
And
he thinks he's their friend.
that's right. But no, he basically is, in my opinion, I'm certainly not a psychologist, but in observing his behavior, he very much is in a father-son relationship with all of these dictators because they really truly are very much like the bully that his father was. And so I mean, he relates to these guys. He aspires to be one of them, and his behavior is very consistent with all of that. But I don't think that he actually was interested in being the president. And I think that he was, to a large extent, very hampered in the presidency because he had to do the job
Right.
and he couldn't like just not do the job because then what was he doing? And then everyone loses faith in him and he loses face, which he couldn't do. But it was after that that he wanted to continue manipulating things. He wanted to continue benefiting from all the relationships that he had developed with world leaders. And then, here he comes again.
Donald Trump is a show pony as opposed to a plow horse, a farm horse. He likes to
Yeah.
perform, but he doesn't like to do anything. And he's
That's
proven that when he was president and now that he's on his campaign, he doesn't really do anything. He wants to go on stage and score big by saying something outrageous. And that
Yeah, he's a carnival
unfortunately,
barker.
yeah,
He's a
exactly.
carnival barker.
Now you said he's looking to litigate this thing after the fact, and without question, that's what he's going to do. It's my
Yeah.
contention, though, that people look at what happened in 2020 and how this all got mucked up and mired up. I don't think after this one, especially if Kamala wins in a big way, a significant amount, I don't think he has the strength or the backing that he had in 2020 after losing in 2024. I think people will have had enough and a lot of people will walk away from him. Does that make sense to you? Or,
Well, yeah, and I also think that if the Republicans are successful in reclaiming their party, there's no way he could come anywhere near it
yeah,
because they're going to put their own candidates and support that candidate and bring the money all in that direction. Because in the last fundraising cycle that $220 million came from only three individuals.
right,
Miriam Adelson being one of them, and then two other people. I don't remember who they are, but an entire fundraising cycle, and the majority of your money comes from only three people, you've lost your donor base.
right.
And now the only thing that remains for him are the people that are lacking insight into the reality of who he is, just want to continue, you know, going down that path with him. They are blind to the truth, and they will remain that way. But there's no infrastructure, there's no apparatus, 4 years from now for him to take this thing forward because you've got all of these military leaders, you've got all of these Republicans, you've got big corporation heads, big company owners, billionaires all out there saying that they do not support him and that he is a threat to democracy. So how could you ever envision that 4 years from now, he would be your guy after all of this?
I don't think the Republicans even expect if he would win, he would make it 4 years. He's not healthy enough, that not
Yeah.
cognitive enough. And some people have even said as soon as he gets in, the Protect Bros and JD Vance are going to try to push him out. And that sounded crazy at first, but I don't know that that's crazy.
Well, it's
I th-
perfectly reasonable.
I mean
He
that's a
wouldn't
game.
go easily.
No, he wouldn't go easily, but I
Yeah,
don't
he
know if he
wouldn't
would
go
have an
quiet.
option. If he had the whole administration doing the 25th Amendment, he may not have the option other than threats and stuff. And I don't know that he has.
Yeah, but he would he wouldn't pick people in his administration that weren't loyal to him. So it would be nearly impossible. like JD Vance would have to become a traitor to Donald Trump
Right.
in
Unless
order
Trump
to
just
advance.
keels over.
Well, that is, I think that would be the more likely case in terms of getting him out of there.
I'm thinking after this election, and he'll go into his litigation or whatever, and he'll fail again like he did in 2020. I feel like the world is going to cave in on Donald Trump. He was successful in delaying court cases and all this stuff,
Mhm.
and sentencing and all this stuff. And I think that will be the fatal flaw for him, because once this election is done, he's more vulnerable than he's ever been. He's got nothing to protect him, and people walking away from him because he lost again.
Yeah, and he doesn't pay his bills.
Right. Exactly.
So I think, the next order of business is he has to deal with the sentencing. But I think he's going to tie that up with, appeal after appeal after appeal. He's never going to go to jail. The question is, what does he do next? He continues selling cryptocurrency. He's got a whole audience of gullible suckers out there willing to buy anything he has on offer, and he'll just go back to doing the things he's doing. He'll muck around behind the scenes with world leaders, which he has no business doing, and it's actually quite illegal for him to be doing that according to the Logan Act. But he'll never be prosecuted for anything. And the reality is the only way Donald Trump is ever going to go away is for when he passes away.
Yeah. Well, I think he will be prosecuted in these three other trials. Whether he ends up in jail or not, I think will determine whether or not he's mentally or physically able, or if he's even alive. He's 78 years old. He's not in good health. He's got more pressure hanging over his head than any human in the world. I don't know how
Yeah.
anybody survives that.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. Yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure there. And, if he doesn't have the protection of the presidency, meaning he's got a job to do, he has to face the music once this election's over.
Somebody made a joke because Joe Biden's come out a couple times and said a couple things like his fans are garbage, and then he said something else. Somebody was suggesting that Joe Biden is becoming a liability for Kamala. I think it's too late for him to be a liability. I think,
No, I mean, you already had over 100, well, you've had, you're closing in on 80 million people who have already voted. The votes
right.
are in, the ballots are in. You've got another 32 million that have that mail-in ballot sitting on their counter in their kitchen waiting to go in, many of which are already on their way. And you've got people going to the polls on Tuesday. So, Joe Biden is just like a non-entity at this point. And his little remark about Madison Square Gardens is not going to hurt. It's not going to hurt Kamala Harris because what he said was true.
Yeah, exactly.
Joe Biden speaks the truth, the way he sees it, and that wasn't a gaffe on his part. He called it the way he saw it. It was unconscionable what those people were saying at that rally, and so he called it. And you know, I know that the Harris campaign was kind of like walking it back a little bit, as all campaigns do, because they've got a momentum, and you don't want a disruption in that momentum of something like this because it's a distraction. But you know what? It didn't rise to the level of anything. Plus, he's not the one running for office. He was just speaking as
Exactly.
president.
Knowing how he is, though, and knowing, I mean, he seems low key and easygoing, but he's got a bit of a temper and he speaks out, and
And he's got an ego.
he's got an ego, and that's fine. But after the election, when there's nothing more to lose, are we going to see Joe Biden speak out a little stronger, maybe do some things? I mean, he's got a period between January 3rd and January 20th where he'll have a sympathetic Congress, and he can do pretty much whatever he wants. He could run some shit through Congress that wouldn't stain Kamala, but would get done for
Mhm.
the Democrats. You see him doing something like that,
Yeah,
or will he just ride this out?
I No, I think that he's going to work every single day between now and the day he's no longer the president. He will do everything he can, like through executive orders or whatever he can do with the existing Congress. I don't know how much that will be. I don't know what's already in process that's just waiting for a signature.
Yeah.
But I think that this is a guy that is going to work in his capacity as president every single day from now until of that transfer of power to Kamala Harris.
I agree. I think he'll. How about this? Is he going to pardon Hunter? He said he wouldn't, but I hope he
No,
does. You don't think he
no
will?
way. No, I mean, that would be such a stain on his legacy as a president, and that's the last thing you want him to be doing on his way out the door. He's too much of a statesman. He's too much of a stand-up guy. He loves his family, but if Hunter Biden's guilty of something, then Joe Biden is a stand-up guy. You got to pay the price.
Yeah, yeah.
He's not a favors guy. He's just not a favors guy. He loves his country too much and he cares about his legacy. That would be a bad look.
So tomorrow, this is Monday when people are
Yeah.
hearing this from Arlene
Hmm.
Unfiltered, lady that knows the
Hmm.
facts, knows the data.
Yeah.
I'm not asking you to make a prediction. I know how I feel and I know what I say. I don't call it a prediction because I can be wrong, as my wife of 41 years points out
Mhm.
daily. But how do you see this playing out? Just the election itself on the 5th, tomorrow.
Uh, well, I think that, we're going to get a lot of the swing states reporting a lot of numbers throughout the night and well into Wednesday morning. We'll have a lot more data coming in on Wednesday and well into Thursday. And I think by Thursday, I mean, depending on what the numbers are looking like from the swing states as they're coming in, we'll have a pretty good sense of the outcome of the election without having to count the remaining ballots because you already know what all the states are going to do that are solid blue, solid red.
Right, right.
Um, so everything really just depends on, how are the votes shaking out as they're counting them. And once you get the big cities reporting, like a Detroit, a Chicago, elsewhere, then you kind of have a sense of, all right, what did the American electorate think about this election and about what the future holds and what do they want? And how many people actually participated in this experiment of our American democracy?
Well, Arlene, I want to thank you for coming on. I know you've been working hard. I've been doing a lot of TikToks and podcasts and stuff like that, but I know you're doing a lot of lives and you're doing a lot of stuff and you're in demand. So I appreciate you taking the time to sit here with us. Um, at some point after the election, we got to do another show so we can just
Yeah,
laugh at those
I'd love
red
that.
motherfuckers.
Kind of a recap of things
Yeah,
and
wrap up with what's
celebrate.
going on.
But
Absolutely.
thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate being here with you and appreciate the conversation. And I'm looking forward to great success coming out of this election. And I'm excited about what the future holds for us in our democracy now that we've pulled it back from going over the cliff
Yeah,
and into
absolutely.
the darkness below. So I'll be glad when this is over, just because I know how many people have been so anxious and filled with anxiety and suffering the PTSD from the 2016 surprise of going to bed at night with one expectation and waking up the next morning with a different result. And so I think that it's going to be a very big collective exhale on the part of many, many Americans once this is finally decided. I don't think anyone's going to rest easy until after the inauguration, but at least we will know the outcome of this election in the week to come.
Absolutely. And for those of you people that are nervous, and I know there's a shitload of you that are nervous, check out Arlene Unfiltered on TikTok. She'll make you feel better. That means I don't have to do it all. Arlene's got more of the facts and data, and you can listen to me spew what I spew, and then go check out Arlene, and guaranteed you'll feel better. So thanks again, Arlene. I appreciate it. For those of you listening, I thank you for taking the time out of your day to do that. Hope you have a great day, and we will talk to you tomorrow.